Recording is on.
Ready to dive in? Welcome to Adventures in Truth podcast. Every episode, we explore, expand, and evolve our understanding of the truths we encounter and experience in our human quest for clarity and exponential growth. And now welcome your hosts, Dr. Jeffrey Smith and Jim Case.
Welcome to another Adventures in Truth podcast. My name is Jim Case. Welcome to the show. And I'm happy today to be here with my friend and co-host, Dr. Jeff Smith. Hi, Jeff.
Hello. Greetings, everyone.
How are you? Here we are, another exciting adventure, another dive. And live from Peru, from Pisac at a center in Tantrea, or center called Tantrea in Pisac. Get my prepositions correct. I'd like to welcome Paul Diamond to the show again. Paul, welcome back. Great to see you. Glad you're well. How are you?
Hi, guys. Yeah, very well, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Great to see you. Today we've spent a lot of time in our podcast talking about plant-based medicines, and currently there is a series we have running on BBS Radio at 10 a.m. on Saturday mornings, so it's 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and lots of great information. Paul has been with us on a couple of those episodes, and we talk from top to bottom, but one of the things that we haven't spent a great deal of time on is what happens when you're done. What happens when you come out of journey, and how do you handle what you saw? How do you handle what you do with what you saw? And then what do you do with it? How do you use it in the world? How do you take all this information and create that quantum change that we assume you initially stepped into it for, that transformation, that expansion of consciousness? So lots of layers into this process and lots of things to talk about in this process, but the idea of being prepared for coming out of journey to me seems even as relevant as being prepared for going into a journey. So at that juncture, I'm going to let Paul talk about that for a second, and the importance of why is this important? Why do we want to talk about what happens on the other end?
Yeah. I think it's, of course, absolutely vital. I think that both ends of the journey experience are necessary. Firstly, the preparatory stage before you go in, and then what you do with that experience afterwards. It's not automatic that the experience gives fruit. To have the experience in and of itself may not in fact be that useful or valuable. It may only be in application that we find some kind of utility to the experience. Of course, it's also true to say that it's not always necessary to do something with our medicine experience. William said that, the true value of any mystical experience was the fruit of that experience, i.e. what we want.
I'm sorry, I missed the quote. The fruit of that experience.
Well, it wasn't a direct quote, but the idea being essentially that the mystical experience, because on one end it can be so far out there, so far removed from our normal everyday reality, and on the other end of the spectrum is our non-dual type experiences, which don't have any qualitative aspect to them. Both of these can be very difficult to apply to the normal world. They don't have any real kind of meaning, as it were, that is necessarily applicable. We have to either try and make the meaning from it or find some meaning from it, or the experiences are left in a sort of certain category of, that was way out there. and there's not much we can do with it.
I was remembering what initially, when the initial idea started to form, when I was feeling like maybe this was something I wanted to partake in. One of my clients had shared with me that he had done this thing called ayahuasca, which when I at the time didn't know what it was, and he broke out his notebooks, and every journey that he took, every single journey was all about aliens, and every single journey he takes, it's all about these wild alien experiences that he has. And he's showing me his notebooks. He's showing me all the pictures he draws and the notes he takes and who he talked to and what things he understood, and really powerful stuff. But I remember thinking to myself, oh, okay, I've never had a alien experience. I don't know that I want an alien experience. But how is that going to work for me? Does everybody do aliens? I mean, what's the story there? Because you hear that frequently from my experience, that a lot of people kind of have that symbolism, or that, I don't know if you would call it symbolism. I guess it is. But so it's so interesting how unique it is. And I had none of that in my experience. Nowhere, not in any particular corner of my consciousness. It was nowhere. So I find that fascinating for it to be such a wide range. But I guess when there's 7.5 billion people on the planet, we all have a wide range of what our experiences are, and where our energy is, and how we understand consciousness in the world and God and all of it. So I can imagine that it's quite unique to each individual.
I'm wondering, before we continue on with this notion of symbolism versus direct understanding, or whatever the opposite of symbolism would be, if we could first talk about the active ingredient in different plant-based medicines seems to be focused around DMT, and regardless of which medicine you're using, leads you to a place of having that experience of increased amounts of DMT in the mind, in the brain, because Paul may be referencing more ayahuasca-based references or answers to your questions, and I would be coming from more of a psilocybin-based experience. But could we say that regardless of the type of medicine you're using, that the overall experience would be the same? I think it's important to start there. Okay, Paul, you're shaking.
No, I would vehemently disagree. Yeah, no, I would disagree. I would say no, absolutely. Firstly, not all medicines are on the DMT, dimethyltryptamine pathway. Some are on the mescaline pathway, for example. Ibogaine's not on the same pathway. Daitora's not on the same pathway. Tobacco's not on the same pathway. Yeah, so actually many of them, of course, not on the dimethyltryptamine pathway. Really only ayahuasca, because it uses dimethyltryptamine containing plants, and then DMT, and then psilocybin, which of course is structurally similar to dimethyltryptamine. And both of them mimicking serotonin, of course, in their sort of shape and formation, structurally speaking. True psychedelics, of course, supposed to attach to the 5-HT2A receptor site area of the brain. Is a very particular area of the brain in order to be a true psychedelic. And one thing that it's known to do is to diminish the sense of individualized self. It diminishes the sense of I'm a structured, individualized being in the world, and therefore you get this kind of expansive, all-encompassing universality kind of feelings and sensations, etc. So I would disagree with that. And I think also, again, of course, not only are the medicines different about where they take us to and what they do, as Jim was saying, they're different from what they do to us individually. And then, of course, they can be very different what they do to us individually from moment to, from night to night. And every day of the ayahuasca was very, very radically different. There were certain similarities, of course, but also things that were very, very different about all of the experiences from one night to the next, with the same shaman, with the same medicine, but just different, energies, different astral energies. The moon is in a different, placement. whatever it may be that affects the deep interior of the psyche, which I feel is actually quite heavily influenced, by various factors, whatever it may be, that can come out on the medicine. And it can vary, of course, from very heavily individualized experiences on the medicine to very very transpersonal experiences, very nothing to do with you kind of experiences. There's a very broad range there. Benny Shannon wrote The Antipodes of the Mind, I forget what the subtitle was, The Antipodes of the Mind, the phenomenology of the ayahuasca experience. And it traces a variety of ayahuasca experience, and it's huge. There's so much there, ranging from non-dual experiences to different spirits and sprites and ghosts, to aliens, to hidden temples, all kinds of different things there. And of course, traditional shamans would take all of it very, very literally.
Okay. So,
okay.
We always have to take a moment with Paul because he gives so much information and I have to okay, I need an extra second to let it penetrate because it's always so good. So,
well, to try to understand the question that you're asking, Jim, because it sounds like Paul has chosen ayahuasca as is that true, Paul, that you've chosen ayahuasca to be the primary medicine that you use to help people have these psychedelic experiences?
Well, I wouldn't say that was my raison d'etre for utilizing the ayahuasca, but I have chosen that as my major medium of work. Yes, certainly made a medium of healing and opening of consciousness. Yeah, but it's not to say I haven't experienced many other plants and medicines along during my training. I have.
Right. So that would be helpful for us to have this discussion, is trying to understand from our listeners' perspectives if they have a particular interest in a plant-based medicine, or maybe they've had some experiences with plant-based medicines, that in order to understand the answers to the questions that we're asking you, they would have to more understand the particular type of medicine that they were using or are interested in using to understand the question and the answer.
I think ultimately it comes to something deeper and richer, which is really how is it that these various alkaloids, these various chemical formations can affect consciousness, awareness, and reality to such a significant degree. This is where we really need to be looking, not necessarily what experience is being engendered by the experience, but how is it, 5 mil of ayahuasca in the bottom of a cup can radically alter your reality. We have to give some kind of question to the nature of what is reality. How is it arising from moment to moment, usually? How is it that it is so fragile and ephemeral, that it can be so affected by the integration in the brain of a couple of molecules? This is the real question.
Well, most psychotherapists in the West would say that whatever you're experiencing in that moment is your reality, regardless of how you got there. Your experience is your experience. And then we have to take that experience and try to put it in context with the majority of our experience. So when we step into a plant-based medicine arena and we're having this altered, what we call altered, which is just an interesting, it's only altered from the standpoint of your norm. What if what we're calling altered is actually true and real, but what we're experiencing most of the time isn't true and real, but because we're experiencing it most of the time, we call that our reality. So it's really difficult to actually know what reality is based on what you just said. It only takes 5 milligrams of a substance to give you this completely different experience. But then when we come back from these journeys, we dismiss that experience from being reality because we're not there very much. And we go back to what our day in and day out experience is, and we call that reality, even though that could actually be a false reality or a distortion of reality.
Yeah. But it seems to have something to do with neurotransmitters, depending which neurotransmitters are running in your brain.
So one of the other things that seems to be in common with plant-based medicines is this dissolution of the ego. So as we're having these other experiences that we're calling psychedelic or phenomenological, hallucination, whatever you want to call them, as that egoic part of the mind lessens, which is usually the steering wheel, the rudder, the map that drives our life, as that decreases, the mind opens up to a host of other possibilities, of other realities, other dimensions, other energy states that it gets to momentarily experience by having those experiences. And when we come back out of our journey, we're then comparing those experiences that we had to the degree that we can remember them, much like a dream that seems to be very temporal, that unless you're actually documenting your dreams, you have a dream journal, you're familiar with trying to capture as much of the dream that you can. The same thing with these journeys. You come out of them and it was like, I had a dream, and that wasn't, the ego dismisses it as that wasn't really real, because now the ego comes back online again, and it's trying to fight with or wrestle or compete with this other experience that you had in a more pure, non-egoic based place. That really seems to be the struggle that people have, of how much do they bring back with them from these journeys. Is their ego coming back to the full strength that it was before they had the journey, or is there 2% less of ego? Each time you do a journey, can you decrease the amount of ego that's running your life? Is that really what's happening? Is that you have your first journey and you come back out of it, and now you're at 97% egoic based, and you have your second one, and then you get to 95, and your third one, and your 10th one, and your 100th one, and you're down to 70%? Is that something of what might be going on?
If only it was that easy, Jeff.
The 10-minute question. No. Oh my goodness, that was great. I want to jump in a minute, because do you want to elucidate on that a little more, or is that pretty much?
Yeah, I think I summed it up.
Okay. All right. So you were saying earlier, there's something that struck me, and this is something that has been really on my mind, given the current state of the world and the current state of our individual selves, and that is how much we don't know, and how much we have no clue about what's really going on. We can create supposition, we can create conspiracy theories, we can argue and fight and go crazy about every little thing, but the bottom line is we really have no idea what's going on. But I'm not necessarily directly speaking about events as much as I'm talking about consciousness and energy. And your point, Paul, was all of the influences that occur for every individual as they go into the space. If you're called to it and you feel that you want to go into this thing, understand that there are so many things influencing that experience. But that's true every single day of everything that we're doing. And what our hope is with this, and having Paul here and having these conversations, is to bring a little more clarity to that, not from a place of gee, look how dumb we are, but from a place of understand what you're stepping into is a big place of things that we have no experience with or no knowledge of. So our desire to focus here today on this now what process of, okay, I got there, I'm scared shitless, I got here, I'm ready, I think I'm ready. I signed up 3 months ago, and my life has turned upside down since I signed up to come do this. And I'm trying to surrender to everything I can, and I'm trying to be patient with myself, and my world is coming apart at the seams, and I don't understand it, and it's wild and it's crazy, but I'm here. Okay. So they get guided, they get supported, they create a space, they set intention. We get to really fine tune our energies a little bit, to really step into this medicine process. And then we have this experience. We have this just completely altering experience. I can't think of words enough to describe the depth of the experience. But so those experiences go on for hours, when you're in, depending on your dosage, depending on which medicine you're using, with psilocybin, you can go for hours and hours and hours. With ayahuasca, it can go for hours and hours and days. I had both experiences with the medicine in me. So then we go, okay, now I've had all this experience, I've had all these feelings, seen all these things, I've touched all this stuff, I experienced God firsthand. What do I do now? Because now I got to go back to my apartment in Poughkeepsie, and I got to go back to my job, and I got to go back to my relationship and my dog, and I don't even know how to say my name. So where do we go from here? So we want to focus a little bit here on three major categories: symbolism, the integration, and the application of how to take this information forward. And Jeff asked such a great question, and I know it was a short answer, but it was a really good question to kind of clarify expectations. From my perspective, the only expectation I had was I surrender. Because I had no idea what I was coming into. I'd never done psychedelics before I had ayahuasca. I had done mushrooms, but never had done anything like LSD or anything like that. So it was a profound experience. And so rather than get caught up in the minutia of all the breaking down that was going on before I got there, I just decided from the get-go, and I think it was probably in the interview phase where that surrender idea came to me or hit me, or they even said it. And I went, okay, that's my mission. I'm surrendering. And whatever happens, I'm going to surrender all the way up till the day of. And I literally used that mantra the entire time through every single experience, because it was so big. All I could do was say, okay, right now I'm going to be overwhelmed or I'm going to surrender. This is my choice. So the choice was to surrender. So now we have this experience, we have all these symbols. So let's talk a little bit about how important or not important the symbolism is, and what it's about. I know, Paul, in earlier podcasts, you've talked about you kind of have a different approach to that. You want to talk about that a little, and Jeff wants to fill in some of his experience with the symbols and the mushrooms. Ready, go.
So I think, of course, it depends on the individual. Again, it depends on dosage, it depends on the medicine, depends on the level of mind that sort of first level you get sort of ectopic imagery, eyeball hallucination, lines, grids, this kind of deal, which really doesn't really mean anything. This is just kind of neurology. This is just the brain beginning to kind of process the medicine, firing off neurons in the brain, etc. And then, of course, we can get into a kind of a hypnagogic kind of stage with it, where we're kind of dream, you're in a kind of an alpha state, dropping into a deeper state, kind of maybe theta just before sleep, that kind of stage as you get to. You often find when you begin to ingest the medicines, or in the early stages of a lot of medicines, is you get very drowsy. And that's, of course, your brain waves are changing and are dropping down to deeper levels. You get this kind of hypnagogic kind of imagery kind of stuff, which is personally meaningful in some way to a certain degree. And then it can drop down to deep level.
Can you define what hypnagogic is so our listeners understand what that term means?
Yeah, hypnagogic imagery is the imagery that you see sort of before dropping off to sleep at night. You're not fully asleep, you're not fully awake, you're kind of in dreamland, but you're still awake. If somebody came in the room, you'd talk to them, but you were seeing images in your head, pictures in your mind, that kind of deal.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, and then I think it can drop down to a level of personal symbolism, where you have personally meaningful symbols, and then it drops down to a kind of a more subconscious level, and then it comes out to a more universal or transpersonal level, where you're going into the kind of shamanic dimensions, you're going into the various bodlands, etc., things like that. So there's all these kind of like different levels that you experience on the medicine, and some of them are symbolic in nature, some of them are more subjectively objective. I don't want to say they're entirely objective, but they're definitely within your own personal field of experience, objective enough to be helpful, useful fields of information, powers given, gifts passed over, etc., things like that. Making contact with aspects of self or other, we don't really know that. But that's a very fine line when you get down into the deep into and what is exterior, what is self, what is other, is not clearly distinguishable at all. And really, subjective and objective is that major one. Actually, in my own experience, in my own understanding, nothing's objective. I mean, how can you know that? You don't know that. You're only ever going into your subjective world, whatever they may be, wherever they may be. We can't know otherwise, at least.
I'm wondering, from what you were just summarizing, Paul, the people getting sleepy or drowsy and maybe laying down, my experiences have been just the opposite. The medicine makes me get up. I end up taking my clothes off, with the exception of underwear or sweatpants, even outside at very cold temperatures, and I'm very hot. I'm actually sweating, and I might find myself chanting. I might find myself dancing. I'm seeing other entities show up. So
that's usually later. It's not usually straight away, presumably, even in your own experience. It's usually later on. The heat, of course, is Kundalini. When Kundalini rises, you get extremely hot. As spirits are coming out of you, you get extremely cold, all kinds of body sensations, according to what the energy inside is doing and what it's interacting with.
I'm also wondering if, because of the nature of my work as a psychotherapist, where day in and day out for 8 hours a day, I'm making symbolic interpretations of what people are explaining to me in my life or in their life, that when I'm having these experiences, they seem so understandable. They seem so clear. They seem so non-symbolic and directly applicable. But that may be, for me, because of the nature of my work. And I'm always in that mindset. I'm always in that processing of what could this mean, and helping other people understand their dreams, their daily encounters. If that's just a practice that I'm in most of the time, that when I'm in journey, like my own dream, I have a practice of distilling and interpreting my own dreams. So that might be something that is happening for me that would maybe not be happening for other people as quickly or as easily. Because the symbolism to me is like, what are you talking about symbols? It's also directly applicable. It's also clearly understandable. I don't get the symbolism part.
No, I'm with you. I don't get it either. I don't see symbols in my inner journeys. I have experiences of energies, of powers, of beings. Communication with energies, with entities, with powers, etc. All of that kind of thing, which I don't interpret it symbolically. I think that a deity, for example, can be broken down into different symbols that the deity is wearing and is sort of in his character, as it were, but not the deity itself or the being itself. I don't view them as symbolic representations of something. A symbol is that which is supposed to be a representation of something. The experiences I personally have in medicine work they're not symbolic. They're not representations of something. They are something. Their energies, their powers, their inner conditions.
It's interesting that you say that, because I remember specifically, I was surprised at the lack of those. I didn't have, in my journeys, I don't have the symbols per se. I see things, I feel things, I connect with things, largely energy driven. But I remember in this, I want to say it was the third ceremony that we did. Was the first ceremony that I had symbols, and it was this kaleidoscope of Dia de los Muertos pictures that were just spinning around. And I remember specifically laying there going, seriously, this is what you're giving me? Freaking kaleidoscope of, like, what is this? And then I went, surrender, Jim, just surrender. And as soon as I surrendered, all that went away, and then I went into the energy, and I was good. But it was just funny to me to be fully engaged in the medicine and going, really? This you're giving me kaleidoscopes with skulls on it? I mean, come on.
And it's not to say, let's not misunderstand, it's not to say that there is not a level a very deep level of reality that is geometric in its structure. You know, we're talking about the world of yantra, geometric sacred imagery, that is again not actually in the tradition of Tantra, for example, considered a representation of deity. It is considered to be deity itself, in the same way that mantra is not considered to be a standby for the deity, a representation of the deity. It is meant to be the deity in and of itself, you know, one being the body of the deity, one being the mind of the deity.
Paul, what did you mean a moment ago when you said that comes later, when I was describing what you call the Kundalini energy and the more active?
I was only referring to when I was referring to when you get sleepy, it's usually at the beginning of the experience. When you're talking about running around taking your clothes off, that's usually later on.
So in discussing this, because how I'm feeling as we're talking about this, and I heard your words, Paul, and I want to correct this because it sounds like the focus of symbolism is actually not where we should put our attention, in the sense that it is something that occurs, but I guess in the general consciousness, it seems to be that people think about it in terms of what are the symbols and what are the things that, what do they see and what does it mean and what am I going to do with it and all that kind of stuff. And really, what we're saying is that you're traveling through the experience of your consciousness. Is that correct? You're exploring your relationship to universal energy and yourself.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, look, of course, traditional shamanism has one view. Traditional shamanism is also, well, actually, you know, traditional shamans are not also really interpreting the symbols in the same way that, or interpreting the images, let's say, in the same way that a Freudian dream analyst will be looking at the symbols and saying, it means this. But a traditional shaman may be saying, it means that a particular energy, a particular being is trying to communicate with you. This is the message this being is giving, or we don't know what the message is, but it's the message is a being is trying to contact you, something of this nature. Now, I have gone kind of beyond that view in my own way of thinking about it. Whereas I perceive everything I experience in all states of consciousness as none other than consciousness itself. What consciousness? It can't be anything other than. We're inside our own mind, we're inside our own being when we do these things. We're not physically transported to another dimension, although we may feel as though we are there. And we must understand, I'm not being reductionist in this view of these interior states. I am saying it's self-generated, but I'm saying that self is a capital S self. It's being, that self is generating all realities. It's generating dream realities. It's generating medicine realities. It's generating meditation realities. It's generating everyday realities. And it generates the reality after we die and in the after-death process.
Right on. I want to ask one more question in this area before we move on to integration, and it actually relates to the question that Jeff asked that you said no to, but I want to, it's been brewing in me for a minute here, and I want to see where it goes. And that is, can you talk a minute, and how does the ego versus, you were talking about capital S self, so I'm going to use small L self and capital S self. So how does ego fit into this idea of a journey? You know, if someone does it have any impact at all? Does it bypass it entirely, or is it different? Is it different? Because it would seem to me it would be more challenging if there's a strong ego presence. It's going to be more challenging to surrender to the medicine. I don't know if that's real, but I'm trying to understand. There's got to be a relationship, because that relationship exists in us. So how do you see that unfold in the context of the journey?
Yeah. Well, I think we need to understand something, which is who is the observer and the witness in all of these states. You know, there's someone there, isn't there? Even when we say we're in these egoless states, the truth of the matter is, how do you know that? How do you know that unless there's a witness, unless there is some form of identification, even if it's, oh my God, I'm not here? That's a form of identification. You must know that to be able to say it. Now, I'm not suggesting that there aren't states where you don't know that you're in it and you come back afterwards and you were like, I've got no idea where I was or who I was there for a very long time. And then the ego kind of crystallizes, restructures itself. You know, we can go through these kinds of states. Actually, a lot of the time that we think we're in this egoless condition, we're not really. We're in witness state. You know, we're not fully beyond it. We're just in another aspect of the psyche. You know, ego itself is not a major part of the psyche. It doesn't have that big a role. It's taken on a big role, you know, in the context of the entirety of the mind, but it doesn't have that big a role. And of course, again, when we access the particular receptor sites that the psychedelics attached to, they diminish this sense of self. So we go into these egoless or, you know, sort of beyond ego, let's say, kind of conditions, which are transpersonal in nature. But then, of course, as the psychotropic wears off, the ego recrystallizes. It's very rare that we come out of these conditions in any permanent you know, eradication of the ego or anything like this. Extremely rare, as it is in meditation, you know, extremely rare.
Awesome. That great answer. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. So moving into the next section here, probably the biggest section or one of the bigger sections of our talk today, will be about the actual integration process. And I'll start this off just by, I know from my own experience, again, that you know, I'm 3 years into integrating my experience still, and it's still unfolding, and obviously because we're still evolving and things are still, you know, we're still stepping into wanting to understand and learn more and expand more. But I don't know that I thought about that. I knew that there was going to be integration time because, you know, you do a seminar, you go to a seminar and you get juiced up for a weekend and you come out and then you want to apply it all and you want to integrate it and you want it to be a part of you, and you know, by the next weekend you've pretty much forgotten what you learned the previous weekend, and you move on from there. This is different. This is, I think, at least an approach. You have to really think about this coming out of journey process, and that you are going into an intense period of integration. And that to me is all about learning how to take all the information that you received and begin to incorporate it into your experience by the way you think and the way you respond and the way you approach life and the way you interact with people and the choices that you make and all that kind of stuff. How do you see integration, guys, in this context? And do you think it's important? No, nobody got that one.
I think is of course it's important. Of course it's important. Otherwise, really, what's the point? Otherwise, it's just more tourism. You go on these wacky adventures, and you know, that's all it is, really. Unless we learn how to apply it in some way, it's pretty baseless in some manner. You know, it doesn't have any utility really until it's applied. And now how that looks, you know, of course, some of these more outrageous or exotic experiences, very difficult to apply the lessons that you're learning in those beyond reality is a lot bigger than you thought it was. You know, that's obviously going to be a primary lesson there. But, you know, in some of those states, that's the only lesson you can bring back, really. I mean, if you spent the whole time talking to aliens from Zeta Reticuli, there's not a lot you can apply to your Monday morning, you know, boring, mundane job. It's not going to be easy for you. But I think this is where the real work lies. You know, in any mystical experience, it's not the experience in and of itself that's valuable, is what does it change within you? And how do you apply that change in a way that is beneficial for the whole, ultimately, hopefully?
So do you think that integration which comes first? Is it a mixture? Is it best to focus on the integrated part for a little while before you start applying, so that you can? I mean, it seems to, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, if I'm integrating, I'm trying to internalize my experience so that it becomes an organic expression of who I am. So, is that considered application, or is that still part of the integration process? And is the application process simply taking what you learned and putting it to work in your life, or is it through, like I was saying, through bringing it internally, through taking it in and letting it become a natural part of your experience? Then it becomes an expression, and that expression is the application. It seems like there's some gray area here. Not real sure where to go with that.
Well, some of the work that I've had a chance to do with other people in guiding them in their journeys, which is new to me, but quite remarkable and a joy-filled experience, particularly with regard to, say, people wanting to stop smoking, explore their relationship with alcohol or other substances that they've been using to self-medicate their pain or emotional distress, that coming out of the journey, when they're willing to make that the intention of their journey, to understand the nature of their relationship with these substances, I'm hearing fairly consistently that they get clarity on what the substance was doing for them or what it wasn't doing that they wanted it to do, and that they're losing their interest in it. So to me, the integration, when I'm hearing people straight up say, I am no longer interested in, I've lost my interest in consuming this substance, that's life-changing and has a direct application and a direct integration, like immediately coming out of the journey. And it will be tested over time to see if they're going to habituate back to it, or if the law of homeostasis is going to drag them back into that previous connection. But at least they got a model. They got to see themselves as being free from or clear from whatever attachments they were making pre-journey to post-journey, in being free from that connection or that energetic bond.
Yeah. In a sense, when that kind of thing happens, it's sort of like makes integration a little bit unnecessary. It's like already done, isn't it? The work's been done. In this.
Yes. Yep.
So you're saying that the actual journey itself is part of the integration, meaning it happens as a function of the journey. Is that what it?
Well, I think Jeff's brought up a very valid point, which is, when you go into these experiences with intention, and you have a powerful medicine or a powerful shaman or whatever, you're able to get a direct result from your work, something that you specifically asked for, some change specifically, and in that regard, I would say that actually the integration is just to make sure that you don't fall back onto old behavior patterns, I suppose. Right. Actually work of change has occurred, but there needs to be on one hand an element of trust, and on the other hand an element of keeping that up yourself, having self responsibility with that.
Right. I was wanting to offer a personal question with regard to what do I do with this experience in one of my recent journeys that involved you, Paul. The last time you and I chatted, we finished a podcast, and then you and I got to talk for about another 30 minutes following that before we went on with our evening. And that was an evening which I had already intended to do journey, and I let you know that. And I remember you told me right before we ended, you looked me in the eye, right in the camera, and you said, Jeff, remember, you are God. And I don't know if you remember saying that or not, but whatever led you to say that to me, that followed me into that journey that night. And it was a large dosed journey. And about 2 hours into it, you actually came here. You were here with me in that journey. And it was like, oh, hey, Paul, what's going on? It was like you were literally here with me in time and space, and we had full-on dialogue. We talked about things that I don't know about your life that I believe to be true. I don't know much about your personal life, but your family members came up in our discussion, and it was literally like you were here with me. and it was and other entities were showing up as well, but it was just like, why is Paul here? I welcomed you here. It was awesome to have you here, but I remember afterward going, of all the people, why Paul? It was kind of a curious thing. But then since that time, you keep showing up in my journeys, and it's like, isn't that interesting? It's like, and there have been many since then. There's probably a half a dozen where I can almost count on Paul showing up. So I would like to know, and I thought, does Paul know that he's here? You know, if Paul's here, where is Paul really? And you know, how much of him is actually here? And do people
see, am I a symbol of myself?
So I'd be interested in hearing what is happening when I'm having that experience from your experience.
Yeah. Well, it gets so interesting, doesn't it? You know, of course, no, I would say consciously I had no understanding about or memory of that. But it's not to say I don't spend a lot of time on the astral, you know, I kind of do that. I spend a lot of time in meditation, and I spend a lot of time, you know, doing shamanic work and ceremony, etc. So I have a kind of a presence on the astral that if you have a kind of a connection with me in some way or another, you kind of, you know, you can run across me as it were. But not from any kind of conscious or deliberate projection aspect from my end. But you know, that's kind of how it is. The astral is a kind of a realm that's imprintable. You know, the more you focus, the more you intend, the more you visualize, the clearer your self-image, amongst other things, can become in that kind of astral universe. You know, and obviously as a shaman, I have to have some kind of strong presence there to be able to do the work that I do. So not that difficult to run across me.
That's kind of cool. It's almost the picture I was having was a familiar and comfortable guide, you know, that just someone that you've had experience with, that you like, that you enjoy, and you know has a lot of juju. So it's kind of fun to play with. I love that.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and of course it's easy to clothe you know, images, self-images in other imagery. You know, it's also other imagery, you know, other beings, you know, beings of light, etc., can take in all kinds of formations. It doesn't mean, of course, that that's their real shape, that that's actually what they look like. It doesn't really mean that at all. You know, again, the astral is very malleable, so.
Right on. So going into a little more clearly into application, and we can still vacillate between the three, but I was reminded again of this the video that Jeff sent me, the gentleman from London Real who went to Costa Rica, and he's documenting a re-experience of going back to Costa Rica to journey again. And the thing that struck me about this video that was so powerful was the time that he spent on the time when he got back home, and the contrast of the guy that we got to see in the video during his time in Costa Rica, how radically he changed to the guy that he is in his home in England. He was softer, but he was still the same guy. But he wasn't the same guy when he was in Costa Rica. And his deal was application. His deal was, I had these like life-altering experiences about me and about my world and about what I can create and how I can use my platform to do amazing things. And then when he came back, he immediately started to apply. But for me, what I observed was, again, just watching, I was observing a lack of integration before application. So he was trying, because he's that guy. He's that alpha guy who's going to drive his ass through whatever he's got to do to get wherever he's got to go, and that's who he is. And he surrounds himself with those people. And that's amazing to me, but at the same time, there was a lack of honoring of the experience, which is what I guess I call personally integration, is the honoring of the experience, to kind of let it seep into my cells and let it seep into my consciousness and let it sink into my field and just let it be for a short period or a period of time, so that I can begin to apply the energy. Because for me, I don't feel like I have that, where I run out and go, oh, okay, go. That's not my particular personality. But I'd like to talk some about that in how do you balance? How do you, again, I guess it's, as you've said, Paul, many times, it's very, very individual. So how do individuals then assess that for themselves? Again, coming out of this profound experience, having all of these these experiences and feelings and ideas and meetings and talking with whatever it is that's going on in their journey. What's the best way to honor that? How do people figure that out for themselves? I mean, that's really what we want to scratch the surface of here, or at least try to give our listeners is.
I think it's an interesting example you brought up. I think actually, unfortunately, a lot of the initial power of change that occurs when we first engage with medicines or we've just done a retreat or something, I'm afraid it very often dissipates. If we're being honest about the work, if we don't hold it in some way or do something with it in some way or try and integrate it in some way, it kind of drops off. The really good feelings last some weeks, and that's great. And if we've done some really intense work, some of the major things that we went in have changed, and we've done some good work there. It's not valueless by any means, but it's true to say that the ego, or whatever we call the conditioned mind, is pretty sticky. I mean, we've had, if we're looking at it from a mundane perspective, at least conditioning of this lifetime, and from a spiritual perspective, conditioning from many lifetimes that we need to work through. It's very easy to fall back into old patterns. Let's put it that way. It's easier to fall back into old patterns than it is to take up new habits. But it's not to say we can't do that. And, the more we do effectively manage those post ayahuasca or post medicine states, the more we can find value and meaning in them, if we're sensible and mature with it. It doesn't come automatically.
You're saying the integration doesn't come automatically, or the here it go, splitting the hairs.
Certainly the integration and the holding on to whatever feeling of the world anew or self change we've encountered on the medicines. That doesn't always last that long. And we may think, oh, I've changed so fundamentally, I'm never going to go back to being the same person I was. And that's a common feeling after having just finished a retreat, after having just come out of a medicine. But 3 months later, that energy is, mostly dissipated. Not always in every case, obviously. A lot of the time, it kind of dissipates off. So we need to do something to honor that, to take hold of that energy, and to keep it kind of going in some way or another. If we don't do that, it's going to definitely kind of fall off on its own. But we can do something about, generating some power behind it and moving that energy onwards. We can take that responsibility for sure.
Yeah, this topic sounds to me no different than the preponderance of hundreds of thousands of people that will go to a 2-week or a 30-day or 45-day rehab, and they'll get detox, they'll clean up their lives, they're hanging out with other people that have a common interest in getting sober and staying sober. And upon release, 95% of them go right back to their old lives. And within 6 months, they're right back to where they were before, because they didn't actually change anything.
Yeah, and meditation retreats also. Vipassana retreats are notorious for this. You feel amazing after the 10 days, and you keep it up for 3 months, 6 months, perhaps a year, and then it kind of trails off, the energy behind it. You need to keep very self-motivated. You've got to keep working, you've got to keep wanting, and, there's got to be some drive from you.
Right, and oftentimes I've found, Paul, that requires an examination of the job you're doing, the relationships you're in, the food you're eating. I mean, you literally have to change your environment, or you will just go right back to law of homeostasis. It's no different spiritually.
Yeah. So this is a really important piece here, and I want to emphasize it because we haven't actually said the words specifically, but if you didn't have before you went on journey, you should, or we encourage you to have after a journey, the building of some practice, something that keeps you connected to that space that you created. Because as Paul said very early on, this is an experience of internal space. So this is a space you generated with the help of the medicine to expand your consciousness, now you've got to be able to embody that. So how do you do that? Well, like anything else, you have to have a foundation. You have to have ways that you reconnect, ways that you, so that as you're making, as Jeff was saying, as you're making those changes that you have to look at, you have a sacred space to honor that energy and that medicine and that understanding, so that you can begin to apply it in your world in ways that are still true to the medicine, meaning still true to the concept of love, and still true to the concept of connection, and still true to the concept of growth. That you are every day reinforcing the strength of that energy, because it's going to evolve. And as it evolves, Paul talks about the dissipation. It's going to dissipate naturally, and it's going to dissipate anyway. It's going to change over time. But if you're already taking that energy and you're molding it and you're working with it and you're evolving in it, it's going to grow in a different way. It's going to expand and show you things that these are those non-medicine journeys, where you get to experience and understand things through meditation that previously you couldn't, because you built the foundation of it in order to catapult yourself continually, because it is an evolutionary process.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's two sides here. There's one side is the sort of practical application in the world. In other words, are the medicines making us more loving, kinder, more benevolent? The positive attributes that we encounter on the medicine, the universality, the egolessness, etc. Are we applying that in the world? I think that's one side of the equation in terms of integration and application. And the other side that I think is very, very important is the energetic and meditation side of it. Because what happens on the medicine, you see, what we're looking for really when we're talking about integration and application beyond the side, or at least what we're pointing towards, is how to create these states of consciousness, or how to re-achieve these states of consciousness on a permanent or semi-permanent basis, like we're actually pain and exist at that level, perhaps not in the truly outrageous, way out there mind states, but we are trying to evolve consciousness. That's the point of the work, in my view, ultimately, trying to evolve consciousness. So how do we do that? Well, we do that via the very profound and well-structured meditative mystical traditions and meditation schools, and primarily the schools that work with subtle energy. Because what happens on the medicine is your own energy is activated, and in activating your own energy, it opens consciousness. Energy and consciousness are interchangeable. The more energy, the more consciousness. When the energy dissipates, then consciousness becomes lessened. So if we begin to feed more energy into the system once again, via Qigong practices, via pranayama, via yogic technologies, etc., we're internally raising the energy to the point where we're able to achieve the same states of consciousness on a regular basis, but without the crazy aspects of it, in a much more grounded and balanced manner.
And I think that's a wonderful place to begin to bring this to a close. We've got about a minute, maybe or so. Jeff, did you want to bring us to a close? Do you want me to take it? Would you like to give us a quick review, or any thoughts or ideas? And you don't have to. I don't mind.
No, I'll jump into that. For thousands of years, these questions that we're asking have been asked, and for thousands of years, there have been people like Paul who have devoted their life to assisting and trying to help people understand all of these questions. So I'm very thankful for people like Paul that have honored a calling that they have to help us understand the relationship between consciousness and the assistance that plant-based medicines give us to step into that, where otherwise most likely we would not. And when I say we, I'm talking about householders. I'm talking about people who are staying in the urban style of life, that have a job, that have a house, that have a family. Those of us that practice that particular type of a lifestyle often need the assistance of something that can catapult us into expanded realms of consciousness, because our busyness in life otherwise prevents us from having profound meditative, non-medicine based journeys to get there. So thank you, Paul, for your willingness to live your life in service to others, to help us have these profound understandings and awarenesses, and being brave enough to look at these experiences that show up when we allow ourselves to flow into what medicine wants to show us, and then also having the discipline to have a spiritual practice that we're calling non-medicine based journey, that once the medicine shows you how to do it, you can, just like riding a bicycle without training wheels, you need the training wheels in the beginning to understand what balance is, and then you can take the training wheels off and you can ride a bike quite nicely without the training wheels. You'll actually find the training wheels to be an encumbrance. Once you truly learn how to ride a bike, you don't want the training wheels any longer. And that's what I have found to be true with the medicines so far.
Right on. Well, guys, really appreciate you being here today, Paul. Always an amazing experience, and you brought a lot to this that I think our listeners and myself, and I'm sure Jeff too, are taking a lot away from this. So thank you for that. Thank you for the time. Thank you all out there for listening, for being a part of our program, for being willing to step into your own transformation. Take a moment, if you get a second, check us out on Facebook. Check us out at www.adventuresinTruthpodcast.com. You can find Paul, and this will be in the notes, but at www.tantraya.com, TANTRAYA.com, and see all the offerings that he has. He's doing some great stuff too. And appreciate you all. Have an amazing weekend or week or wherever you are, and we'll see you very soon. Thanks, everybody.
So long.
Thank you so much. Ciao.